Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching India as well with me, Frank Pereira. The Maldives last Monday reaffirmed its India First policy, saying it looks forward to working closely with India on all issues and will remain sensitive towards its security and strategic concerns as External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj held talks with the country's top leadership. The Maldivian leaders also expressed commitment to support India's efforts to combat terrorism, particularly cross-border terrorism and crimes such as piracy, organized crime, narcotic drugs and human trafficking. Swaraj was in the Maldives capital of Malé last week on a two-day visit, the first full-fledged bilateral trip from India to the strategically located Indian Ocean island nation after the government of President Ibrahim Mohamed Solih came to power in November last year. She held talks with President Solih, Foreign Minister Abdullah Shahid, former President Mohammad Nasheed and other top leaders. The External Affairs Minister and President Solih took stock of the progress made in bilateral relations since his visit to India in December 2018. On this edition of India's World, we will take stock of the status of the ties between India and the Maldives. Joining me on the program today are Shilkant Sharma, former ambassador, Sriram Chaulia, Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs, and Commodore Anil Jay Singh, retired Vice President, Indian Maritime Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's take stock of the External Affairs Minister's visit to the Maldives and what were the key takeaways for you from that?
I think the biggest takeaway is that after a lapse of several years, her visit put in place the kind of close relationship which we've had with Maldives for long years. You know, we had worked very closely with Gayoom, we had worked very closely with Nasheed, and even the persons who deposed Nasheed, they were invited to Delhi, they came. So India always treated Maldives with the kind of affection and closeness which, you know, a big nation like India should have for its small neighbor. But somehow or the other, that was in a bit of a doubt in the minds of at least the people who ruled Malé. Mercifully, that thing has changed, and since November, everything is going in the right direction. Our Prime Minister himself went for the swearing-in ceremony, and then their President visited here, and now our Foreign Minister visits, and she had a meeting with not only her counterpart, but a number of important ministers in the Maldivian cabinet: health, transport and civil aviation, finance, development. So this is the kind of nexus that we have of cooperation with Maldives, which is all encompassing, which we've had like, and the scale at which the Maldives population is small. But we have said that we will give 1,000 training and scholarship slots to them, which shows the kind of openness that we have. Then these MOUs which were signed, they also deal with strategic issues in the sense that Maldives needs development. They need hospitals. So this renovation of the Indira Gandhi Hospital was done, and she went through the hospital, inspected it. Then we have need for maritime transport. So maritime security is an important dimension with which we have been working with Maldives.
Right.
So, and terrorism, and not only terrorism, but sea piracy, drug trafficking, human trafficking, all these are these non-traditional crimes. About them, Maldives being a small country is particularly vulnerable. And they need India's support, and India is forthcoming with that. The whole visit is from benign India looking to very good relations with its neighbor,
right,
and with no holds barred, outstretched arms. And this is the kind of, and the response which they gave, they call India first. And now that seems to be, you know, the harvest that we get of being, you know, neighborhood first and being good to our neighbors.
Sure, sure.
So in that sense, I consider it is a very successful visit.
A successful visit is what you're calling it, Commodore. Ties back on track, do you believe? And you know, efforts have paid off at the end of the day?
Yes, I think absolutely, because in the sort of emerging geopolitical landscape or seascape now, if it takes the Indo-Pacific, which has a very distinct maritime orientation, every country with whom you share the sea is a neighbor. So Maldives, from that point of view, is a maritime neighbor. And I think our neighborhood first policy and their India first policy complement each other very well. And it was very reassuring that the Maldivian defense minister, during our external affairs minister visit, said, we don't need to militarily talk to any other country. India has always been there to support us. And we have. Whenever Maldives has faced a crisis, we've been the first responders. In any case, India is the preeminent sort of Indian Ocean power, and as a net security provider, as it mandates itself to be, is responsible to ensure that the Indian Ocean region remains safe, stable, follow the rules-based international order, and for the 100,000 odd ships that transit the Indian Ocean, remains secure. And Maldives, despite being the smallest country in Asia, has a huge sea area. And it sits astride some very important sea lanes of communication. And that is why you see how the Chinese have been trying to make overtures to Maldives over the last few years. They've succeeded to a certain extent, particularly part of the Belt and Road Initiative, their whole sort of strategy in the Indian Ocean. They are a permanent presence. So I think from that perspective, this sort of realigning of relationship that has taken place in the last year or so, ever since the new president has taken office, is a very welcome development. And I think India, from a maritime perspective, engages a lot with the Maldives. The Navy engages a lot with the Maldives. From our point of view, it gives us a great sort of, given the sort of change in the maritime security threat from a state-on-state conflict to a more non-traditional, sub-conventional threat, maritime domain awareness becomes very important. We must know what is happening in the seas around us.
Absolutely.
And that is where countries like Maldives really have a big role to play.
Since you brought up China, has a bead been lost in the string of pearls?
I won't go so far as to say that a bead has been lost, but certainly it's not where it was. And I think we must now consolidate. We must see where we fell short earlier, which led to this sort of realignment happening. And from a capacity building perspective, we've got to do a lot more for Maldives to get the sort of reassurance that it's India first and India first always.
Right. That having been said, Professor, is it important for us also not to be complacent? Because let's not forget, China is going to constantly try and make inroads into Maldives. Something is going to happen sometime in the near future also, maybe.
Frank, as soon as Ibrahim Solih got elected, within weeks, in October 2018, the Chinese ambassador in Mali is supposed to have met him and presented him with an invoice of $3.2 billion owed by Maldives to China. And just for perspective for our viewers, the total GDP of the Maldives is around $3.9 billion. So essentially what the Chinese are saying is, you are in hock to us by almost 100% of your national income. And since then, you know, the Chinese, the debt owed by the Maldives to China is still being recalculated, because the previous regime, the authoritarian regime of Abdullah Yameen, had engaged in a lot of hanky-panky with the Chinese that was totally non-transparent and undemocratic. So now the new government is in many ways discovering how much of a debt trap it is already been dragged into. And they're trying to, I think they will need to repudiate some of these Chinese debts, because some of these actually enriched Yamin and his cronies and did not really benefit the nation of Maldives. So I think, but the Chinese will use that creditor leverage to try and remain in the game. And that is the big thing for them, because, you know, that's how they have been able to look at weak countries which are, economically down, and then that's how they capture them and they bring them into their orbit. So I think the Chinese will continue to use, I mean, they can go to international arbitration and other forms to try and enforce their claims. And they will always, Chinese statecraft is to use economic levers to extract political advantages. So they will say that, you know, you need to restrain this India first and all that eventually, or at least you should not be inimical to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and other plans in the Indian Ocean, or else we will, raise the claims. So right. I think they are going to hold on to this debt in a way to try and squeeze Maldives. And therefore, I think it's very important. Prime Minister Modi announced $1.4 billion financial package when Ibrahim Solih visited in December. And I think that is going to go towards budgetary support, but also for social and economic projects, new projects, which will be sustainable and which will not be, white elephants like what the Chinese had done under Yamin. So I think it's very important that we do understand that the Chinese are there, and the entire region, even Sri Lanka for that matter, or a number of other countries across the Western Indian Ocean region are already part of the Belt and Road. So the question for us is now, what do we do about reducing the dependence of these small countries? And I think we have done a bold step. Just for perspective, Bhutan, Nepal and Afghanistan, these three countries have traditionally been the largest recipients of Indian assistance, development assistance. But now Maldives has come in. We were totally reluctant to commit anything as long as the old regime was there. But now we are saying, in a way, we are incentivizing the democratic resurgence in the Maldives by saying if they go in a democratic and a moderate fashion as we are seeing under the current administration, we appreciate that and we will try to nurture it. If they go against our interests, we will not. And we have said the same to some of these other recipients in our neighborhood too in the past. And certainly we would not want the Maldives to repay the Chinese debt using Indian money. So what we would want is for the Maldives to become self-sufficient, self-reliant, and to be able to have both economic and strategic military capabilities of its own, so that it is able to hold off from this looming shadow of the Chinese.
Right. Two aspects, Ambassador. First, on the economy, there's another agreement that has been signed for an $800 million line of credit between India and the Maldives. And another aspect, probably not so much spoken about, is cultural and sporting ties. India has decided to build a cricket stadium in the Maldives. Now, that has paid us a lot of dividend as far as Afghanistan is concerned. The Afghanistan cricket team has made India its home, and that has resulted in better ties between the two countries. So the same can happen with the Maldives as well.
Yes, the aspect of a country which is young, the population of Maldives also predominantly young. So how do you deal with them? You entice the young by jobs, by training, education and sport. So I think our focus is on all those four areas, and stadium is a very visible manifestation of your interest. So I think that's a very good area to convey our goodwill and our involvement, engagement. The other thing which I want to mention is that about the China factor is that if you look at this entire Indian Ocean region, the Chinese have been at it for not just past 5-6 years, but for a long time. The other big Indian Ocean power is Australia. All around Australia, you have South Pacific islands. Those islands are predominantly dominated by Chinese. The Chinese have gone and settled there. And one by one, they've managed to, this is the go game which they've been playing. The same thing with Maldives. When Yamin was there, he came to India and he'd come and gave a talk in ICWA. And he was saying that we have 200,000 Chinese who come as tourists. So I thought to myself, they should not outnumber your population. So smaller countries have to worry about a big country which has nothing but a predatory interest. India has nothing. India does nothing which is predatory. Whatever is this entire, if you see joint statement or entire report of our foreign minister's visit or prime minister's visit or their president's visit, we have this benign attitude and very generous attitude. Now this pays dividend in the longer run because the democratically elected government, which has popular support, it looks to India. So when a democratically elected government talks about pro-India policies, it shows that they have also the people's support. So if we won people's heart and minds, that is a much better thing. We can't compete with China because their methods are very drastic. But they are also coming across problems in Africa, for instance. Many of the Chinese forays into Africa have given them backlash. And so we have to see about it. But we should not think of dealing with our smaller neighbors in any of these highfalutin terms, but man to man, people to people, concerned with their health, concerned with their prosperity, like currency swap arrangement we've done. They've had it for a long time. Now that gives them a certain stability.
Sure.
When they needed water at a certain stage, we rushed to provide water. I think he would say this. Long back when I was Secretary General of SAARC, they had a crunch for rice. So SARC had a grain food security. So we offered, but by the time the SARC processes could follow, they had gone to Andhra, picked up the lice, and got back to, because the closeness to India of Maldives is such that whatever they need, if we are ready to give, their problems are solved.
Right.
So that kind of assurance, it goes much further than this kind of intimidatory, predatory methods.
Absolutely. Commander, that having been said, what strategic importance is the Maldives to India, and how important is it to have a stable Maldives for the entire region?
I think it's a very important thing, and that is why when the Prime Minister took over office, one of the things he enunciated was something called Sagar, which is actually the term for sea in Hindi, which was basically an acronym for security and growth for all in the region. And this was all about engaging with our neighborhood, our strategic so-called sphere of influence, through connectivity, capacity building, a cooperative engagement strategy. And I think we've done that remarkably well over the years, in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly with the Maldives. We've been there, we've responded, as I said, to every crisis of theirs, including the 2014 water crisis, when not only did we airlift water, some of our ships, which had RO plants, were dispatched and were able to distill water and give to the Maldivians. We gave them 2 helicopters, which, if you recollect, President Yamin said, at Chinese insistence, we were told that please take them back. And they didn't renew the visa of our air crews. But that's been, again, reversed. And the Defense Minister also alluded to that and said it's been a great help to us in our search and rescue activities, because we've got a lot of islands which need this kind of assistance. And I believe ever since this government has come to power, they've already been used on more than 10 occasions to rescue fishermen and people at sea. The third thing I think which is very, very important and which doesn't find mention very often is our support to their blue economy initiatives. Maldives has the lowest elevation in the world. It is only 1.5 meters above sea level. It is in serious fear of being inundated with climate change. And that is why they've said they'll be carbon free by 2019 and whatever. I think this is where India has to come in and support these initiatives of the small island developing states, the SIDS, in accordance with item 14 of the SDG. But whatever initiative these small countries take towards this, we should support them. And we'll get their support in return. They've already committed to supporting our bid for the UN Security Council seat. They're going to support our bid for a non-permanent seat in the Security Council in 2020. So I think when it comes to supporting them in these blue economy initiatives, it's very important that we take the lead and we show them, we actually walk the talk, let me put it that way.
Right.
And secondly, the other aspect is, we are bringing them now into our sort of coastal security grid. There's a discussion going on, and I think it's been more or less finalized, that we will establish coastal security radars on all the 26 atolls that the Maldives has. And they'll be interlinked with our coastal security grid, which is established and which has a center near Gurgaon. So I think all these things go towards this sort of engagement which crosses the day-to-day tactical level into a strategic realm.
Absolutely. Professor, are there any aspects of the bilateral relationship that need special attention, do you think?
Well, Frank, I think we have historically been worried about the trend of Islamist radicalization in the Maldives, and the previous regime of Abdullah Yamin had deliberately stoked and encouraged that phenomenon for domestic political polarization in the Maldives. Now, thankfully, we have a strong, moderate and secular regime of Ibrahim Soli. So, and they are quite committed to de-radicalizing their society. And that's one area I think, we must pay attention to it, because, of the geographical proximity and the risk of jihadist activity which harms our interests emanating from countries like the Maldives. So I think we need to do a lot with regard to, for example, we have a lot of moderate Islamic clerics who can be highly beneficial in turning around the opinions in the Maldives. They have their Maulavis and their systems, many of which are inspired by the Saudi Arabian, the Wahhabi model. And that's something, and also by the Pakistanis, by the way, who, although it's a very small country, Pakistan has used these factors to align itself with the previous regime of Abdullah Yameen. So it's very important for us to work to clear the ideological brainwashing, especially of the youth. So you mentioned the youth. Sports is a good thing, but we should also bring them over in large numbers, expose them to the tolerant and extremely moderate forms of Islam that we have in India. And I think that connection will help us a lot. The other point I mentioned before as well, Frank, is that, with regard to housing and so on, which are quite desperate need in the Maldives, our companies, remember GMR was building the airport and it was booted out by Yameen. So we have a large number of companies. Prime Minister Modi has been talking to his Maldivian counterpart about bringing back our companies to build those sustainable housing projects. So these kind of things will make a real difference on the ground in people's lives. And last but not least, I'll say that we have the IORA, Indian Ocean Regional Association, and Maldives is one of the members, and so is India and Australia. So all of us, I think we need to think about Maldives in the larger picture of the IORA and how we can come up with the common principles for democracy, common principles for moderate, forms of politics, common principles on the basis of which we can build, the sustainable development.
Right.
So if we can come up with norms and then, implement it at a wider scale, we can also pull in others. Remember, Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, all these are in the vicinity of the Maldives, and all of them are part of the IORA. And so if we use the IORA mechanisms, apart from the bilateral, already India, Maldives, in many ways, I think Prime Minister Modi has proved his detractors wrong, because they were saying that we lost the Maldives. And now, they're all quiet because we regained the Maldives. So the point is that, but apart from bilateral, I think if we can bring in a kind of a support group of key countries. And Sri Lanka, I will emphasize this, Frank, Sri Lanka is very critical because the Maldives and Sri Lanka ethnically have very close, bonds going back historically. And, the democracy movement that survived the Yameen dictatorship was mostly based in Sri Lanka, including Nasheed. So we need to bring in Sri Lanka also, and because Sri Lanka also recently there was an attempt to overthrow a democratically elected regime and it survived. So if we can create a Friends of Maldives kind of a grouping that can sustain this, because otherwise the Chinese will create the propaganda and the Pakistanis that, the Indians are doing hegemony in the Maldives.
And everyone can help each other out.
So IORA should be the vehicle, I think, to prop up Maldives and make it stable.
All right. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Ambassador. What next for the India-Maldives bilateral relationship?
I think we should restore Maldives' confidence in the world tourism circuit, The previous government, because of the policies which Professor mentioned, had actually put off tourists. Maldives, their seas are very tranquil. They're almost like lake. So a lot of these tourists from the north who want to escape this harsh winter, they would like to come to Maldives. But that tourism requires completely tranquil atmosphere, which the previous governments of Nasheed and Gayoom was providing. So they used to feel very free in Maldives. But in recent years, only Chinese come there. What about the others? So that kind of tourism thing should be we should encourage, and I think the meetings for our foreign minister also included civil aviation and tourism. And tourism also is a kind of a block against radical and conservative views, because tourists want to be free. They won't go there. Look at what's happening in Egypt, for instance. The radicals in Egypt try to prevent the tourists from coming, so they attack the tourist centers, So that is the kind of stuff where the government of the day finds it more useful to encourage liberal, moderate views rather than radical views.
Yeah, true. Commodore?
I think in a nutshell, I think we need to ensure that we bring Maldives into a sort of collective security framework in the region through capacity building in a big way, give them the confidence that they have the ability to look after their own interests. We provide them the back-end support for them to be able to do that. We will gain in the bargain in the sense that we sort of secure our own strategic area of interest, but I think it will give them a lot of confidence as a country, and that is what will reciprocate as far as we are concerned in their support to us at every stage in the security, maritime security ambit that is emerging in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. Professor, close the show for us.
Frank, the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which we and Japan have pioneered, involves, linking Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia with South Asia and the eastern coast of Africa. Now, under Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, we should bring in the Japanese in a big way as well to the Maldives, because they want to also express themselves, and they want to prevent a kind of Chinese hegemony in the Indo-Pacific also. And Japan has a kind of resources that we don't have. But together with Japan, if we can make Maldives a kind of a pilot country for Asia-Africa Growth Corridor and implement specific projects there, Japan, India plus one kind of a model, I think it will go a very long way to bring the Maldives to the next level. Maldives is not a very poor country, in terms of it's almost like a middle-income country with a small population. So, 3 or 4 big Japanese and Indian projects jointly can completely transform the face of that country. And as democracies, I'm sure that we will, not go down the line of what the Chinese have done.
Right.
So it will give confidence to people of Maldives and sustain this second phase of democracy that has begun in that country.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India as well. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. I'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiaasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.